This week in On the Go, a growing movement in transportation, mobility as a service, also known by its acronym MaaS. The city of Tampa is getting on board.
You should be able to choose from the fastest trip or the greenest trip or the cheapest trip. And we're looking to layer on as many modes as we can possibly form partnerships with.
Hello and welcome to another episode of On the Go, the T-Barta podcast, where we discuss the latest in transit and transportation throughout Tampa Bay. I'm your host, T-Barta Communications Director, Chris Jadek, and today we are talking about a new transportation project being launched in Tampa, Mobility as a Service. Back with us to talk about that is Brandon Campbell, Smart Mobility Manager with the City of Tampa. Brandon, it's good to talk with you again.
Thanks, Chris. I'm glad to be here.
Our listeners may recall we had you on the program a couple months ago talking about the city's electric scooter program, but you wear many hats, and this is another program you've been working on for some time. To start, many may have heard the term Mobility as a Service, MaaS, its acronym for short. So what exactly is that? What is MaaS?
So Mobility as a Service is really the idea that you can bring all of your mobility options into a common platform. And it's really can be kind of modular. You can use different functionalities or build in different functionalities into any given mobility as a service platform. Just thinking about what the ultimate goal of MaaS is that you could get a subscription for all of your mobility options, pay a single fee, and maybe get a menu of different choices that you can choose from throughout, we'll say, a month or a year or however long that term would be. But in the interim, we're working on building functionality with payment, with different modes, and with routing.
There's a lot there, and we'll get into all of that. So when you talk about mobility options, essentially we're talking about public transit or Uber, or what are some of the things that all go into a MaaS application that I'd be able to pick from?
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's transit, it's Uber and Lyft or rideshare, it's micromobility. It could be a parking option for a park and ride. And with routing, we also talk about routing through the walking segment of a trip as well. So really anything that could get you from point A to point B is fair game for including into the application.
So I guess it's fair to say the idea is getting from point A to point B sometimes involves more than just one mode of transportation. If I'm going to go to work, I have to walk to my car, get in my car, go park, maybe have to park somewhere that's farther away. I guess the whole idea is that if you're not just self-sufficient in your own vehicle, but utilizing some other mobility functions, this kind of pulls that all together, the idea to make it more convenient and more accessible for you to get where you need to go. Is that right?
Yes, that's exactly right. And when you think about looking at those different options, as it is, that can be a very manual process. You may open the Uber application, you may open the Lyft application, you may look at different micromobility applications, but having those all in a common platform and having some comparative routes that you can choose between and even pay for is where the convenience of a MaaS application comes into play.
Well, I saw a posting dating back to July 2019. That's nearly 3 years ago, that Tampa was issuing an RFI, a request for information, to vendors on mobility as a service. So it looks like this has been in the works for quite some time, hasn't it?
It definitely has been. And really some of the history with this particular pilot, we started out when we identified mobility as a service as a regional priority within what we call the Tampa Bay Smart Cities Alliance, which is a partnership. We've got academic, public, private people that are involved into the Smart Cities Alliance. And we've identified a few different regional priorities that we can pilot as different entities and then come back to the group and see if there's an opportunity to pursue on a broader basis. So that's kind of the genesis of this. The Smart Cities Alliance a few years ago said, hey, let's see if we can get something going with MaaS. The city of Tampa, we raised our hand and we said, hey, we can take the lead on the pilot.
So did the pandemic cause any delays in your procurement and rollout?
Certainly. I mean, the pandemic caused delays on a lot of what we've done at the city. However, when you look at that 3-year rollout so far, I'd say that really what the critical timeline issues have come more into play when it comes to playing in a space that we're really not that familiar with. We're really kind of leading out with this. Our selected vendor, we recently learned all of their existing partnerships are with transit agencies. So even coming at it from the angle of a municipality and looking at it through that lens has changed the flavor just a little bit. And so there are lots of areas where we're pushing them in their development and that are really kind of new territory for us.
You mentioned the Smart Cities Alliance, and I do want to backtrack a little bit and talk about the bigger picture before we move on. Can you tell me more about that and Mayor Castor's larger initiative to improve infrastructure and mobility in the city? I've seen what's known as the city's MOVES, Citywide Mobility Plan. How is that the same or relates to the Smart Cities Alliance?
So the Smart Cities Alliance was formed after FHWA held their Smart Cities Challenge. That was a grant program that ended up going to the city of Columbus, Ohio. We applied for that grant and we were highly rated within that process. But in the feedback or in the debrief after we were not awarded that grant, one of the things that they told us was a strength with Columbus's Smart Columbus submission was that they had a strong coalition of regional support around their initiatives. So we took that feedback and we decided that we wanted to focus on trying to regionalize some of our priorities and to solve some of our transportation challenges that come within the region at large. And through that, we formed the Tampa Bay Smart Cities Alliance. That actually predates the Castor administration, but I think it feeds into what Mayor Castor's priorities are. So if you look at what Mayor Castor came into office with, she had 5 emphasis areas that she really wanted to focus her efforts on under what's called Transforming Tampa's Tomorrow, or the T3 initiative. And you can find more about that program as a whole at tampa.gov/T3. But at the top of the list of those priorities was transportation. And very early in her administration, she formed an advisory team to help take a look at what we do on a strategic level with respect to transportation and to make some recommendations. One of those recommendations that came from that team was to put together a long-term vision or a 30-year mobility plan that we're calling MOVES. MOVES is an acronym. It stands for Mobility for All, Opportunity, Vision, Equity, and Public Safety. Those are our 5 core values that we're applying to everything that we do within transportation, and it certainly applies to mobility as a service as well.
Excellent. Well, then I guess MaaS is part of the MOVES program. Is that correct to say?
Yes, I'd say that's correct to say. They're very well strategically aligned. And while we started the MaaS pilot procurement before MOVES was formalized, we're all sort of paddling in the same direction.
Well, let's get into the new program now. So what is going to happen and how will people be able to benefit from it?
We have signed a contract with a company out of Israel called Move It. Actually, when we started this process, Move It was a startup company, and it's been interesting to see how they have matured through the process. They were acquired by Intel, and so their approach has changed a little bit. Our approach has changed a little bit, but in the end, people can download the Move It application and see some added functionality and some application development that we had helped to accelerate, specifically tailored to the Tampa Bay area.
Okay. And what's the timeline for your rollout of this program?
Our official launch should be within the next 60 days. The Move It application itself is available on the various app stores as of right now. So you can get that application now. You can see some of what we'll have and a baseline for what we're building on within the scope of this pilot.
And what are all the modes of transit or transportation, I really should say, because it's not just transit, of course, all the modes that will be included in this application and available for me to choose if I'm downtown Tampa and want to go out to West Shore, something like that?
So I think I mentioned that Move It's partnerships elsewhere have been all directly with transit agencies. So you can kind of glean from that one of their core strengths is the functionality of the transit service. We're layering on top of that scooters, so micromobility. They've got partnerships, they've got data feeds from Uber and Lyft. They're developing a routing tool specifically for us. You should be able to choose from the fastest trip or the greenest trip or the cheapest trip. And we're looking to layer on as many modes as we can possibly form partnerships with. But that requires bringing in different agencies, different entities, and forming a relationship that may not exist prior to now. And so that's part of what we're trying to achieve within this project, is to make those connections, to build in those feeds, to build in the functionality to move forward.
So does that mean Hart, the Tampa streetcar, that transit, will that also be in your
Yes.
application on the launch?
Yes, it will. So they have a GTFS, or Global Transit Feed Specification feed from Hart. They already have the data that shows you where the bus is and how long it'll take for the bus to get to the stop where you're waiting. One of the areas that we're working right now to sort of complete the loop on is the payment integration with Flamingo fares. That's the digital payment system that Hart and PSTA also uses, as well as a couple of other agencies. And that's not something that Move It has previously done. So with our project specifically and the resources that we're putting into it, they are working on building in that fare payment system within the application itself.
Who can participate in this once you have it launched? Do you need to be a citizen of Tampa, or is it based on where you are geographically? How's that all going to work?
So anybody can use it. It's just a smartphone application. Any smartphone user can use it by downloading it from their respective application store. There's no direct cost to use the application.
Well, let's take a minute to talk about the geography of the project. You, of course, are with the city of Tampa. It's a Tampa program, but people travel beyond city borders. Will it only work if I'm traveling from one part of the city to another, or does it expand to Hillsborough County, or can I use it, even beyond Hillsborough County? What's kind of the limits of that?
Well, because we've initiated the project within the city of Tampa, it's a little bit Tampa centric, but it's not limited to the borders of Tampa. So the way that Move It breaks up their application, the entire Tampa Bay region is shown within the application, but some of the functionality or the data partnerships that we're helping to facilitate are basically within the city limits of Tampa. And that's part of why Move It was our selected vendor, because they already have some regional data feeds that they've pulled into their application. And if we move beyond a pilot, this 15-month pilot, to a longer term program, it really seems like it could be a good tool to hand off to even another agency or someone who has a broader authority to take and run within the region.
You talked about the importance of regionalism, and certainly you're speaking to something that T-BARTA embraces, since we are a 5-county region as well and understand the power of that. I take it, is this something you hope gets a little bit of support, gets its feet under it, so to speak, and then perhaps other transportation options and modalities around the area can join in and maybe grow the program as it goes on?
Absolutely. I mentioned that sort of we have this aspirational vision of mobility as a service where you can just come in and have a subscription to all of the different options that are available to you. That's several steps away. There's a lot of development between our small pilot and something like that. But there's a lot of room between here and there where we can take the concept and mold it to the region as needed.
And stepping back and taking a look at MaaS overall and what it's really intended to be, it's supposed to be a platform, one-stop shopping, so to speak, I guess, in one sort of payment option. Is that kind of the holy grail of it? You have all these different types of options on your app. And then if it's an Uber or it's transit or it's something that requires a payment, it's just one payment form as opposed to having these multiple payments and all these different vendors. That's really the idea, correct?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think calling it the Holy Grail is a good term to use. Really, you can build in different levels of functionality. For instance, with some of the micromobility providers, there are different levels of integration. So you may see a scooter option where the MaaS application shows you where the scooter is, but there's still a need to go to their application to book and pay. But there may be another scooter option with a deeper integration where you can pay within the application. So we're making these incremental changes with that ultimate vision in mind.
Well, with any new project like this, getting public participation requires public knowledge and understanding. Hopefully this podcast can help with that. But I'm certain you have other plans to market and get the word out. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct. A significant part of our contract with Move It is going toward promoting it within the region. We'll also be using some of our in-house resources and staff to do some promotion as well.
Let's take a minute to talk about the finances regarding this pilot. In other words, is this something that costs the city money and is seen as a public service that a progressive city should provide? Or is there revenue generation possible to make it more self-sustaining?
At this point, it's a cost to the city, and I would be remiss if I did not mention that it's funded in partnership with FDOT. So we're putting $150,000 toward this 15-month pilot, and FDOT has matched that as well, for which we're really thankful. In the future, we don't know what the financial arrangement will be, what the overall costs will be, if it becomes a revenue neutral, and if it is funded through advertisement, something like that. But at this point, there's a cost, and we see a big enough benefit to the city that we are willing to put that investment forth.
And as you mentioned, this is a pilot, so you'll be gathering a lot of information, certainly learning a lot. And those answers, I guess, will come with the information that you gather over the next 15 months, I'm sure. Looking around the nation, you talked about Columbus, Ohio being a model city for some of these initiatives. Were there other cities or other programs that you modeled this program on? And if so, what are some of the things you're trying to emulate?
We're actually pretty unique in our arrangement. I mentioned that at least with Move It, we are the first municipality to have a direct relationship with them. So there are things that we've seen with other transit agencies or with private applications that we want to build in. But really, a lot of the ideas about what MaaS should be have been conceptual, and they've been discussed in professional organizations and dreamed about. We're just trying to put forth something that gets us closer to that ultimate dream.
You mentioned this will be a 15-month pilot, and certainly you're going to be gathering that information. So how do you go about measuring the results of this program to determine whether it's been successful or how successful it's been?
Move It has some built-in reporting tools and some metrics that they're going to provide us regarding the engagement with the tool and how it's increasing over the 15-month pilot period. So that will be our primary measure of success. But I think just as a qualitative measure, we're going to be testing it out with in-house staff to make sure that the functionality is there, make sure that it is convenient, make sure that it's offering options that we want to see through the application.
This is what's known as a public-private partnership, with Tampa, of course, being the public part, organizing and overseeing the project, Move It being the private vendor coming in to provide that expertise, product development. I know it's early in MaaS, so maybe you don't have the answers to this yet, but do we see or might we see all private MaaS ventures or perhaps all public ventures, or really is this kind of the public-private model the way you think most MaaS development is going to go in the near term?
Well, I would be speculating a little bit here, but I think that the two options that we'll see are all private or public-private partnerships. You may see some all public initiatives, but they tend to be expensive. And when something is developed specifically for your agency, it's a little bit harder to maintain. That's one of the reasons we chose to go through a public-private partnership and to get an existing vendor. You mentioned our RFI that we put out a few years ago. We got a dozen responses back, and they ranged really all across the board. And through reviewing those, we had come to the conclusion that just developing something from scratch for us was not in the best interest of our resources or our staff time, not necessarily in the best interest of the city, just because of those maintenance needs for a scratch build application. We also initially wanted to do what's called a white label application with Move It. When we first signed our contract with them, that was the direction we were headed. And a white label application is where they basically create a clone of their application that's a City of Tampa branded application. We ran into issues with or concerns about how the data would be managed, what the personally identified information protections should be, and then how to transition from a pilot to a broader regional type of a program. That's part of why it's taken 3 years for us to get where we are, because we needed to learn that lesson, because we decided in the end to play to our strengths and to allow Move It to do what they have already put together the in-house resources to do, and to move forward that way.
I'm glad you mentioned security, because certainly people are concerned about that if they're going to download this application and put in some payment information. You did vet Move It, I'm sure, and that's why they were selected. Tell me a little bit more about the security measures that might be in place. So if I am somebody new to this program and I decide I want to download it and use it, I can feel a little more self-assured that my information is safe.
For us, there's some comfort in knowing that Move It has got Intel behind them and that they've gone through the PCI, or I think it's payment card cybersecurity process that is required for accepting payments. So the card aspect of it is one thing, but then just the personally identified information that's unrelated to payment itself that is necessary within any sort of an application. We just weren't that comfortable with our own ability to warehouse those sorts of type of data. And Move It has done this for millions of customers as it is. They've got some security measures in place that they outlined within their proposal, and we came to a place where we were comfortable that they've got adequate protections in place.
If we can, let's take a hypothetical example, and you can provide one or use one that I'll make up here on the spot. Walk me through what I can expect if I'm using this app. So let's say I'm at USF on the campus up there off of Fowler, and I've got some place to be, maybe down by the convention center, and I want to see how I can possibly get there, what my options really are. If I have this application, what's going to happen? What am I going to do? And what choices am I going to be making?
So it would probably show you a bus route that comes downtown. It would probably show you an Uber or Lyft estimated price and arrival time. It would probably show you some scooter options from the bus stop that you'd be getting off to your final destination. And it would also show you the price of each different leg. So you might find a few different options that you can choose from and base that choice on price or on quality of expected service or on how long it would take you to get there.
So will I use the app just as information as I might Google Maps, or then after I see what the options are and make my decisions, am I then going to kind of book my trip?
It depends on the option chosen. Some of the options, depending on their depth of integration within Move It, you can actually book and pay for within the application. Some of them you would have to go to a separate application to book. One of the areas that we're hoping to push is to get more of those options within the application itself. It also will show you information as you are in transit as well. It tells you how what your route is and how long to expect to get to that destination.
As we mentioned, this is a pilot project, so you have a lot of information, a lot of questions to answer. What do you think the longer term vision is for MaaS beyond 15 months? You can't decide what you're going to be 3-4 years from now until you find out what's going to happen over the next 15 months. But looking at what the potential for MaaS is, and this has been talked about for some time, what's the potential and what do you envision could be the MaaS application here in Tampa, Hillsborough County, and Tampa Bay?
My vision for the next step of MaaS is that we get to the end of this 15-month pilot and a larger entity takes on a more regional application. And whether that's Move It or whether we go out for another round of proposals and evaluate Move It against other different providers, however that service delivery, whatever the vehicle is, I think that the next step will likely be a more regionally branded and regionally led program.
Well, I don't want to speak for our executive director, David Green, but T. Barta, being the Regional Transit Authority, would welcome those conversations. So keep us in the mix. We'll be keeping close watch on what you do there.
Yeah, we'll definitely keep in touch.
A final question for those listening out there, say, okay, this all sounds great and you're rolling it out. And I know I can hear some more things, but what do you want them to know if somebody's listening and says, yeah, I want to download this thing? What can you tell them to watch out for, or what do you want them to do?
Well, we hope it makes things more convenient for you or shines a light on the convenience of some of the mobility options within the city of Tampa. We hope it's useful. And we would really like to hear back once you get a chance to test it and let us know what your experience has been with it.
Do you know when the app will be available? If I wanted to go to my app store and find it, or is that's still being worked out?
You can download the app right now. Our official launch with some added functionality should be within the next 60 days. And over the course of the 15 months, we should be adding some incremental changes, making some changes and adding functionality as we go.
And if I want to find that app, is there a brand name you go by, or how would I search for it?
It's just Move It, MOOVIT.
Well, Brandon, I appreciate sharing all that information. This is a great program, and certainly you guys are on the cutting edge of what's happening with MaaS. So we'll be very interested to hear what develops over the next 15 months. No doubt your experience will not only be valuable for the city of Tampa, but other communities as well as they try to develop their own programs. So congratulations on getting this launched. Again, Brandon Campbell is the Smart Mobility Manager with the city of Tampa. And we've been talking about Tampa's soon to launch Mobility as a Service pilot project. I'm Chris Jadek, T-BARTA Communications Director. Thank you for listening to On the Go, the Transit and Transportation Podcast from the Tampa Bay Area Regional Transit Authority.